Just before I plunge into it, first of all, well done all of you for surviving till so late in the evening. It's quite amazing. But also I wanted to say that working with this group has been an incredible experience. Just listening to the presentations made me reflect that every time we met in person or in paper, it has been a group that stimulated curiosity and really open conversations with very diverse topics. And it's been a real pleasure to be part of this. So I just wanted to kind of say it over this stage as well, that it's really been great doing this bit of work. I'm going to be talking about a group of people that are migrants in care. And when we talk about marginalization and being lost in translation, it's definitely a group that sometimes kind of falls off the radar in terms of who they are, what their needs are. And I'm looking at live-in care workers. I'm going to, So, on the whole, live-in caregivers globally are more or less an unskilled workforce. Now, it does not mean that they have a set of skills, but they are unskilled in live-in care. It's very rare to get proper training in what does it mean to take yourself from one country to another country and embed yourself in a family. Mostly female, and it's very much kind of under the radar. 99.9% of the time, it means that you are migrating for work and leaving your family behind. Okay? So there are lots of complications and lots of issues for families that get themselves, for women that get themselves into the situation. It's a model that's on the increase, and it's something that we're beginning to see more and more around the world. I'm going to actually look at places that are outside of Europe just to give you a bit of a feel for what's going on in different places. There are lots of global policies in dementia talking about staying in the community, living in the community, supporting people at home, and it follows that line. And a lot of times when you talk to relatives, they say, I wish I didn't have to move my dad, my mom, whoever out. If somebody could come and be with them, that would be great. So it kind of follows that fantasy. But like most fantasies, they're great when they're fantasies. The reality is often much messier and much less aesthetic than we think it's going to be. And there are different approaches of how to formalize it in different parts of the world. It's a really grey field and a grey market. Just as a raise of hands, I'm not going to start asking where everybody is from, but wherever you've come from, do you know of people within your community or your country that are living with live-in care workers? Is it something that's reached your regions? Okay. So again, it's something that, some people in the room, and we were talking about it in our specialist group, that for some of us it's something that's already a reality, for some of us it's a big issue, some of us aren't seeing it, so it's something that it's emerging. In Asian countries, there's a really interesting breakdown in terms of where are we seeing this. So again, in our fantasy world, we might be thinking this is something that's only happening in rich countries. That is not the case. So we're seeing it in places like Indonesia and India. We're seeing the term of ayah, which is, from my understanding, a term for a maternal figure. And often it's people who have been left in rural areas. Their children have migrated or immigrated or expacted to another part of the world, are seeing things in another part of the world, are worried about what's happening with the parents, and are bringing in somebody from a different part of the village or a different part of the country to look after them. Indonesia has a very similar model that people as a private enterprise are doing this and moving people around the country. The upper middle income information comes from China, where things are very different between rural communities and urban communities, and what we're seeing is that people have moved into cities. Those who have done well are moving their parents with them. They don't want to care, have the capacity to care, or any of those reasons, and they will buy somebody from the village to come and care for their parents in the city. Huge difference in numbers in terms of 37% nearly in towns of elderly people with dementia are receiving live-in care, as opposed to about 6% that will buy somebody or pay somebody privately in the rural areas to do this. In Singapore, again, another step up the high-income country, you can legally hire a migrant care worker. She is legally bonded to one specific family. It's an individual contract, and they are imported from all of that basin around. They will come and look for family. And lots of families do it because it's cheaper than residential care. So financially, there's a huge benefit, and families see this as a good investment of money. I don't have to look after a care home. I'll pay somebody, they'll do that, and I will keep on working, and I earn much more money, so it's worthwhile spending it on care rather than reducing my hours, which is one of the things that we see a lot kind of in the UK culture of saying, I'm reducing my hours to look after my parents and to provide care. In Europe, the picture is a bit different. Most countries don't have a legal system in place for live-in care. There are countries that have it as part of their culture of care. So we have evidence from places like Spain and Italy that families are doing this on their own, that there are agencies that will help with the matching. In the UK, agencies are in the increase in terms of matching and finding. And one of the things when I was looking at this as part of my PhD is that actually the best place to find a live-in care worker in the UK at the time was on Gumtree or Facebook. People were selling their services, lots of great things going in the market. Interestingly, in the UK, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about a dementia tax, and people moving out and having to pay for their care. And at the same time, there's been an increase in care agencies that are trying to structure live-in care and are trying to say it will be actually cheaper in the long term to pay for a live-in care worker as opposed to letting somebody go into residential care, paying for that, the financial implications. Part of the complexity is that from a legal point of view in the UK, it comes under the same services as domiciliary care. So a live-in care service would be evaluated absolutely the same as somebody who's coming in for a 45-minute visit. So you can kind of see that there's some issues that need to be looked at. And then there are countries that have private agencies. There's evidence about Switzerland and Germany that you can buy care. Where is it legal in the world? These are the 3 countries that I found a legal system in place outside of Singapore, looking at live-in care. In Canada, it's a private arrangement. You can get the okay from the government, and that means that you can import a live-in care worker. It's a route for migration. So if you want to migrate to Canada, one of your ways in is to be a live-in care worker, caregiver for an elderly person. It's not necessarily just for dementia. In Austria, and if anybody here is from Austria and is familiar with the system, I'd be happy to hear more about it. It's needs tested, so does that person need 24/7 supervision? If so, you're allowed to employ somebody. It's partly funded, but you have to employ 2 individuals, and they're usually people who come from one of the former Eastern Bloc of Europe. They will not migrate to Austria. They will come and do shifts of either 1 week or 2 weeks and rotate. So you'll have 2 live-in care workers. The wages that they receive in Austria are enough for them to be able to spend half a month here and half a month there. So it's a very interesting system. Again, I've read about it. I haven't spoken to anybody who's engaging with it. Fascinated to know if any of you know any more about it. In Israel, it's means tested and needs tested. As Debbie was saying, it's very popular, it's very common. The vast majority of older people in the community that need 24/7 supervision will start with this. The common denominator is everybody is migrating. What these live-in care workers are saying about this experience of being a live-in care worker is that there's a lot of uncertainty around the role, a lot of unclarity about what the role is, what their rights are, what they should be doing, what shouldn't they be doing. Is their role as a live-in carer, should they be cleaning curtains? Okay? Are they actually a housemaid or are they a carer? A lot of them report feelings, very strong feelings of isolation, loneliness. and lots of risk issues related to poor mental health. And again, imagine that scenario, you're very isolated, you're in a home with somebody that you don't know. Lots of issues around abuse. Is the live-in care worker being abused? Is the live-in care worker abusing? How do you identify abuse without knowledge of dementia, without having that cultural background and understanding, being moved to another country where we have lots of linguistic gaps? It's really, really risky. We have two very vulnerable people thrown into a vulnerable situation without a lot of supervision and support. And a lot of these live-in care workers are downscaling professionally. So a lot of them might have trained as nurses or as teachers, or I've met some that had legal training in the country they came from, some of them, one of them told me a story that she did the studying, but she ran out of money to do the exam, so she couldn't do it, so she became a live-in care worker. Okay? So for a lot of them, they had this ambition of what they're going to do with their lives. Things didn't turn out that way. They've moved thousands of miles, and they're providing personal care. There's a huge gap in expectations. And there's a really interesting piece of work that came out of Switzerland in terms of how are these live-in care workers perceived, and how do we advertise them? So we're talking about stigma and stigmatization and the words that we use. And live-in care workers are often advertised as properties with code words of things that we should understand what they mean. So we start off with wanted qualities, organized, warm, caring, background in nursing. But then we say things like the country of origin as if it's a secret code to know what that person is going to be like. Right? Romanian Catholic, from South India, from the Philippines. Okay? And that's enough for you to know who that person is and what kind of a carer they're going to be. So it's a very stigmatized kind of workforce. And the legal status is always advertised as female care migrant. So kind of, you know from the start, this isn't anybody locally, that's somebody who has come, they're going to do the job and they're going away, they're not going to stay, you're not going to have to faff around with that kind of stuff. So very, very charged in terms of who they are. Did I go backwards? I went backwards. How did I manage to go backwards? That's quite impressive. Sorry. That was just a bizarre déjà vu. That's where I want to be. From my research, lots of issues. What I did was I looked at triadic relationships. So I looked at families where there was a live-in care worker, person living with dementia, and a spouse, and trying to understand how life worked for all three of them. And these were issues that came up from everybody in that household. So there were issues around privacy. What should I ask? What shouldn't I ask? How much should people be involved? How much shouldn't they be involved? Loyalty. Am I loyal to their loyalty to their family at home? How loyal are they to the host family? Are they going to up and run if I say something that offends them and go and look for a different family to work with? Lots of issues around language, religion, culture, food. Thinking about who has been left behind in the country that they came from. Can that be spoken about at all, and what has been left behind? And who's the boss? Who calls the shots? In different families, there were different dynamics about who actually has the last say. This is a very sad account of a family where all three of them were abusing and were abused by other members of the triad. And it just shows how stressful this situation can be. So I'll read this out. This is one of the live-in care workers, and she was saying, this is my last job. It's sometimes hard, but you need to keep, she's talking about keeping it calm and keep on going. She is also mad, wants to hit me, the spouse, not the person living with dementia. Curses me, not good at all, does not say a good word, whatever she wants. If I don't, there is war. Go away from here. I don't want you. Go, go, go. I don't want you at all. A few times she also hit me, but there is nothing to do. She also gets mad. I go, she gets mad. Fire and fire does not work, right? She is fire, I am also fire. If I will also be fire, it will not work. I need to be calm. She is fire, I am water. Okay? Living like that 24/7, you can imagine that that person living with dementia wasn't in a happy place either. But in other homes, it really is a meeting of two personal worlds trying to coexist. And this is one of the husbands talking about bringing in a live-in care worker for his wife and saying, look, it's a small crisis. There's no doubt that you feel invaded, like some strange force has come into your home. Your independence is, I can overall do what I want to do, but it's a small thing, so you understand? She was here for her week and her father was killed. Okay? So this live-in care worker's father was involved in a car accident back where she came from when she just started. And there was a lot of conversation about what do you do as a human being? You know, where do we go from here? And this was a wife caregiver talking about the male live-in care worker who was a younger man looking after her husband. And she was talking about things she questioned. Yep. It's even cruel to talk about it, sexual relationships for live-in care workers. Even if they go sometimes to visit, they don't really go that much. So the take-home thought is that when we're living in a global world of aging and migration, the meetings between people living with dementia and other marginalized groups is one which we really need to be positive and safe about for all of the people involved and make sure that we're not leaving anybody out and neglected. Thanks again for surviving.